Okay, so I need to tell you something that happened to me a few weeks ago that genuinely made me feel kind of stupid. Not like embarrassed stupid, more like genuinely blindsided by how unprepared I was for something that absolutely should not have caught me off guard at my age. I got my first real paycheck, not a side gig payment, not cash, an actual direct deposit from an actual employer. And I remember sitting there staring at the number on my phone and thinking, wait, that is not what we agreed on. That is not the number we discussed in the interview. Where did the rest of it go? And that is literally what this channel is about. That moment right there. Because nobody told me. Nobody sat me down and explained it. I spent years in school learning how to dissect sentences and memorize the phases of mitosis and write 5-paragraph essays about books I barely read. But the moment real money entered my life, I was completely lost. And I am guessing at least some of you watching this know exactly what that feels like. So today, I want to talk about that gap. The gap between what school taught us and what we actually needed to know. Because I have been doing a lot of thinking about this lately, and the more I dig into it, the more frustrated and honestly a little angry I get. Not in like a dramatic way, just in that quiet, tired way where you realize something was kind of taken from you and nobody even acknowledged it. Alright, so let me start with the idea itself because I want to be fair here. I do not think school is completely useless. I want to be real about that. There are things I learned in school that I actually use. Writing, reading critically, basic math, some of that stuff genuinely matters. But there is this enormous category of knowledge that almost everyone I know has had to learn on their own, often through painful experience, and it revolves around money, how taxes work, what a credit score actually is, and why it matters. The difference between a debit card and a credit card in terms of building financial history, how interest compounds, what a W-4 form is asking you when you first get a job, how health insurance deductibles work, what a 401k is, and why it supposedly matters when you are 22 and broke. Basic budgeting. The concept of net versus gross income. None of that. Not a single lesson. At least not for me. And here's the thing that gets me. These are not edge cases. These are not niche topics that only apply to certain people. Every single person who gets a job will deal with taxes. Every single person who wants to rent an apartment will face a credit check. Every single person who gets sick will have to navigate health insurance. This is not advanced knowledge. This is just life. And we graduated without it. Now, here is where my first honest reaction to this whole topic kicks in, because when I started thinking about it, my first instinct was to just be annoyed at teachers or the school system in general. Like someone dropped the ball, somebody forgot to add the important stuff, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized it is a bit more complicated than that. It is not like teachers woke up and decided to be unhelpful. The curriculum is built by a system, and that system has been built over a long time with a lot of different priorities, and apparently financial literacy was just never high on the list. Which honestly raises a question that I keep coming back to. Who benefits from people not understanding money? Because when you do not understand how taxes work, you cannot question them. When you do not understand how credit works, you are way easier to take advantage of. When you do not understand how interest compounds on debt, you make decisions that end up costing you a lot more than you realized. And the people on the other end of those transactions, the banks, the lenders, the employers, they do understand all of it, every single detail. So there is this massive information gap, and it almost always benefits the people who already have money and power. I'm not saying that is some grand conspiracy. I am genuinely not smart enough to know if it is intentional or just structural laziness. But either way, the result is the same. A whole generation of people stepping into adult life with almost no useful financial knowledge and then being told they are bad with money when things go wrong. Okay, so let me bring this into my actual situation because that is kind of the whole point of this channel. I am not here to lecture anyone about systemic issues. I am here to think out loud about what this means for me, starting from nearly nothing. So, when that first paycheck hit, and I realized it was smaller than expected, I had to figure out why. And I am going to be honest, I did not fully understand what I was looking at. I saw deductions, I saw acronyms I half recognized from a vague memory of someone mentioning them once. FICA, federal withholding, state tax, and then there were other lines I did not even recognize at all. And I thought, okay, this is stuff I should know. This is basic. Why do I not know this? So I started looking it up, and what I found was kind of overwhelming at first, but also weirdly clarifying once things started clicking together. Here is the simplified version of what I learned. When you earn money from a job, the number they pay you and the number that actually lands in your bank account are two different numbers. The difference goes to things like federal income tax, which funds the federal government, state income tax, which varies depending on where you live, Social Security and Medicare taxes, which are part of that FICA thing I mentioned and which come out automatically regardless of how much you make at the lower end of the income scale. And if your employer offers health insurance, those premiums might come out of your paycheck too. So the number they quote you in a job offer is called your gross income. What actually hits your account is your net income. And for a lot of people just starting out, that gap is genuinely shocking because nobody prepared you for it. Now here's where I started to feel the real weight of this. I started thinking about someone earning a decent income, like a household bringing in around 6 figures, which sounds like a lot. That used to kind of mean comfortable, right? Like 6 figures was the dream people talked about. But when you actually run the numbers and account for income taxes, payroll taxes, health insurance premiums, and then stuff like property taxes if you own a home, and childcare if you have kids, the actual take-home amount starts looking a whole lot smaller than the headline number. And I want to be clear, I am not at that income level at all. I am way earlier in this journey than that, but understanding this math matters to me right now because I am making decisions that will compound over time. The habits I form now, the things I understand or do not understand now, those have a pretty big effect on where I end up later. What hit me hardest was this idea of invisible costs, like the taxes that come out of your paycheck are visible. You can see them on the stub, but there are also taxes and costs that are kind of baked into everything else. Sales tax on purchases, fees bundled into your phone bill, registration costs for a car. These things individually feel small, but they stack. And when you have not been taught to think about your total financial picture, you just kind of absorb those hits one by one without ever stepping back to see the full pattern. And the full pattern, at least from what I have been learning, is that a huge chunk of what people earn gets pulled away in various directions before they ever get to make a real choice about it. That is not necessarily wrong. Some of those things fund infrastructure and services that people actually use. But the problem is that most of us have never been given the tools to understand what is being taken, why, and whether there are legal ways to reduce that burden, or at least plan around it. Things like tax credits, deductions, understanding the difference between a Roth account and a traditional one, and why that matters for taxes now versus later. Knowing that if you have kids, there are credits that can reduce your tax bill. These are not loopholes for rich people. These are things regular people can and should use. But if you do not know they exist, you cannot use them. And this is the core realization I keep landing on. The gap between school and reality is not just about not knowing facts. It is about not having a framework for thinking about money at all. I spent years learning how to analyze literature and solve algebra problems in specific formats, but nobody ever gave me a framework for thinking about my own financial life. Nobody said, here is how to map out where your money goes. Here is how to think about a decision that involves borrowing. Here's what it actually means when interest accrues on a balance you carry. That framework is what I am trying to build now, mostly just by reading things and thinking them through out loud like this. Here is what I have taken away from all of this as something practical. I cannot go back and redo school. I cannot make the system retroactively teach me what it should have, but I can stop waiting for someone to hand me the knowledge and just start acquiring it myself, piece by piece, even if it is late, even if I feel behind, even if I have to look up terms that feel like they should be obvious. The first thing I did after that paycheck confusion was actually sit down and understand my own pay stub. Like, look at every single line and figure out what it means. That was uncomfortable because some of it still felt confusing, but I got there eventually. And now when I get paid, I actually know what I am looking at. That is a small thing, but it felt significant. The second thing is I want to start understanding how credit actually works before I need it badly, because a lot of financial advice operates on this assumption that you already understand credit scores, that you already have a history, that you have already made good or bad decisions, and now you're just managing them. But I am at the stage before that. I am trying to understand the rules before the game forces me to play. And the third thing is just continuing to ask the basic questions that I feel like I should have been asked in school. Questions like, what is this actually costing me in total over time? What happens if I delay this decision? What do I actually understand about this versus what am I just assuming? Those are the questions I wish someone had normalized for me years ago. There is something I want to name here that I think is important. A lot of personal finance content online has this underlying assumption that if you are struggling, it is because you made bad choices or you lack discipline. And sometimes that might be true, but sometimes the reality is that the math is just hard. And if you started with nothing and nobody taught you the rules, falling behind is kind of built into the situation. That does not mean nothing can be done. But it means the problem is not just your spending habits. It is also a knowledge gap that most people in your position were never given a chance to close. I'm not trying to make excuses for myself. I genuinely want to get better at this. But I also think there is something important about naming the starting conditions honestly instead of pretending everyone begins from the same place. So where does that leave me? I am still figuring it out. I still have moments where I look at a financial document and feel genuinely confused, but I am committed to working through it slowly, one idea at a time, and sharing the process here as I go. For the next video, I want to dig into something that comes up constantly in finance conversations and that I have always kind of nodded along to without really understanding. Compound interest. Everyone says it is powerful. Some people call it the eighth wonder of the world or whatever. But what does it actually do to your money when you have almost nothing to start with? Does the math still work in your favor? Does it work the same way when we are talking about debt instead of savings? Because I have a feeling the answer to that is a lot more complicated than the inspirational version of the story. And I want to think through it for real. So that is coming next, and I hope you stick around for it.